I'm going to do my best to give you an overview of where we are, and people that have questions can always contact us. My contact information is here. We're always willing to talk to folks and answer questions. And thanks, Eric, and to the MPA for having us. First, what's the MRC? The MRC is a small, not-for-profit association that is in the media business. We were established a little over 50 years ago as a result of some congressional hearings that happened in the late 50s and early 60s. At the end of, and those hearings, called the Harris Committee hearings, investigated how media is measured in the United States because of some weird things that happened in the late 50s, primarily something that was a quiz show scandal back in the late 50s, led Congress to get involved in media measurement. They basically said, what are these things ratings? Why would somebody manipulate a quiz show to attract audience? And what does that mean financially? That blossomed into a very large congressional investigation that lasted 6 years. At the end of that process, the government came forward and said there should be some regulation over how media is measured, but the government didn't want to regulate it. They said it was too dynamic, too niche for them to do it, and they recommended to the industry to do self-regulation. And this is about media audiences. Our organization was formed at that point. This is our mission statement. It reads pretty easy, but it's not easy. We're working with companies in the space and who are for-profit companies that are measuring media, and we're standing in between their clients and their measurement techniques and trying to foster quality and transparency. We're a very simple organization. We don't sell anything. We don't hold conferences. We just do two things. We set standards for how media is measured, and we conduct audits to verify compliance with those standards. Our audits are conducted by independent CPAs, which is a requirement that was set up by the government when we were formed. Just kind of like if you're a public company, you just can't have anybody go do an audit of your financial statements to report to the SEC. We have that similar foundational requirement that we have to use CPAs to conduct our audits as the foundation of our process. We write a lot of standards, and particularly for the last 15 years or so, we've been immersed in digital. We first were called into a meeting at the 4As with their media policy committee, and I was in the room with a gentleman I didn't know at the time, a guy named Greg Stewart, and Greg ran the IAB. And we met each other for the first time. We sat down and the 4As said, these internet's measurement techniques are a mess. We need standards. Will you two go about writing them? So we sat down and we started that process. And this is kind of a list of some of the output of those standard setting techniques. These are enormous projects. Like, for example, the latest one, the topic of today's discussion, viewable impressions, had an enormous team of companies working with us, well over 100 companies from all different types of organizations, buyers and sellers, where we vet those standards with those groups of people, and we write the standards, the staff of the MRC. So you can see we're quite experienced at doing this. We started in 2005 after that 4A's meeting with how to measure an ad impression, a served ad impression. That's the only technology really we had at the time. When the ad hit the page, didn't matter whether somebody could see that ad or not. Then about maybe 6 years or so ago, this Russian guy came into our office and he said, I've been to various organizations and they don't want to talk to me, but I want to show you something that I invented. And he had invented the JavaScript code to measure viewability. In about a millisecond, we knew that was a big deal. So then we said, we want to audit that technology. We did. Then other vendors entered the space. Many people were thinking about this, and viewable impressions were born. At the same time, there was a project called 3MS going on. 3MS is a joint project of the IAB, the 4As, and the ANA, and they were trying to revolutionize the way digital media is measured and used in the marketplace. They hired a large consulting firm called Bain & Company. They did a big project, and at the end of that, and by the way, during that project, they met with the MRC 50 times, 50, to talk about how media measurement worked. After that process, they issued 5 principles. Here are 3 of the principles. The top one is the subject today: convert served impressions to viewable impressions. Impressions that aren't viewable, no one had the opportunity to see, are valueless. So why do we use them? Now that we have the technology, let's measure viewable impressions. It was an easy ask, and Bain set that as the #1 principle. But it's actually really hard to do, and most of you guys are probably living that right now. But I want to remind you of a couple other principles. Principle number 2 is to convert the currency in digital from gross ad impressions. I serve those impressions through DoubleClick or some other function. I just counted those to something that's an audience-based currency. So not only did the impression land, it was viewable by a human. Was it in target for demographics? Either, and by demographics, I don't just mean age and gender. That could be various things like what's the last site I was on, or other types of characteristics. But principle number 2 is moving to that audience-based currency. To do principle number 2, you have to do principle number 1, because you need an impression to be viewable for it to count in audience-based currency, just like television impressions are viewable. Radio impressions are audible. You needed digital impressions to be on that same basis. Some people call me and say, George, what are you guys, crazy at the MRC? You set a 1-second standard for a viewable impression, or for a video, a 2-second standard? What's that about? That has nothing to do with whether that ad message transferred. And what I would say to them is, that's not what we were trying to do. What we were trying to do is designate the moment when that impression is countable in principle number 2. So think about it. How long do you have to tune your television for it to be included in the ratings? That's what we're trying to accomplish with the viewable impression transfer. And then I tell them there's principle number 4, which is a project we haven't started yet, but we intend to standardize, to the extent we can, a few of the metrics that are used in brand message transfer, and also the interactivity metrics that matter. So not only have I been on the ad for a viewable impression, let's say it's a video ad, what did I do? How long did I go through? Did I click on it? Did I scroll away from it, etc.? Did I watch the entire thing? So there are going to be engagement metrics standardized. So the viewable impression, a key message here is the viewable impression is something of an end to itself, but it's the input into a further larger strategy, which is to convert to viewable impressions and a digital audience-based currency. You think viewable impressions are disruptive, and they are. I know they are, because I'm living it too. Step number 2 is going to be disruptive also, because not only do they have to be viewable and they have to be viewed by a human, they have to be in target. Start thinking about that. Start using the available tools to assess that, because that's going to come at you as a currency. So here's just a brief summary where we are. We issued the viewable impression standards in June 2014, and we were all using a currency based on served impressions. Today, we're seeing people convert slowly, because there's a lot of hoopla, but the truth is there's still a slow conversion going on to viewable impressions. But keep in mind, coming soon, we have an audience-based currency standard that'll be coming out. We're already working on that standard. There's already a large group of people working on that standard, If you want to get involved in that, my contact information is at the end of this slide. Anyone can join that project, anyone. Doesn't matter, you don't have to be a member of the MRC, you don't even have to be employed. If you're interested, you could join the project. What is the measurement standard? Most of you probably know this. 50% of the pixels of the ad in view, in the viewable port of the browser, for at least 1 second for a display ad, and 50% and 2 seconds for a video ad. That was set looking at billions and billions of impressions and how people interact with them. Basically, what we did is we statistically analyzed serving instances and when people began to have measurable interaction with them. So if you clicked on an ad, let's say you got a video ad, you clicked on it, you scrolled away from it, you X'd out, you did any number of things that are measurable. We tracked those and for billions of impressions, and we laid those up and statistically analyzed those. And when was there a statistically significant level of action noted? That actually ended up being about 2.5 seconds for a video ad. So we set the standard at 2, because once you've taken action on the ad, that's past the opportunity to see. That is, actually you've assessed that it's an ad, and you either like the get-go or you don't like the get-go or whatever, and you do what you do with that ad. That's beyond the opportunity to see. So we set it before that, and similarly with display. Key point, it's not a measurement of engagement. I just went over that, but I'm telling you, a lot of people don't quite get that just yet, but it's not that. Wait till project on the 4th stage will do that. There's a huge debate surrounding adoption. I'll try to sort out how we feel about it. First of all, we're not aware of any ad campaign that's 100% viewable. You can't even control all the factors. Like people scroll away before it's been on the screen for a second. No matter how good you are, you're not going to have a 100% viewable campaign. However, an ad can be 100% viewable. So people that tell you that ads can't be 100% viewable, they don't understand. So if I'm an agency, I can actually ask to buy 100% viewable ads and only pay for those. And there are some agencies that want to do that. The problem is that people also don't fully understand how that constrains supply right now. So if you think about served ads, multiple on a page, everywhere, I counted them. Now I'm only counting viewable ads. That decreases supply. And what does that lead to? A debate about pricing. Unavoidable. It's totally unavoidable. Today, marketers who don't feel very good about non-viewable impressions are saying, I don't want to pay more for that. I want to pay the same amount, but I only want viewable impressions. And that is something that might be able to come across temporarily, but the basic laws of supply and demand are going to take hold, and pricing is going to begin to play a role here. The sell side is really struggling with implementation. They have to optimize. They're dealing with a myriad of vendors. Keep in mind, we told everybody 4 years ago that we're going to trade on served impressions that are viewable only, viewable impressions. And now we're saying, why do we have so many vendors that measure viewable impressions? Well, they did what we asked them to do. We actually estimate that there are over 50 viewable impression vendors out there. At some point in time, they're going to want somebody to validate them. Who pays for all that? Who's paying? You just heard a panel about who's bearing the cost of vendors and the proliferation of all the different techniques out there. Same issue. The buy side is telling us, why should we ever buy a non-viewable impression again? Why? It's worthless. So there's a natural tension there. And what we recommend is negotiate terms in advance. All the terms of viewability, do it. Test with your vendor, make sure the tech works. Allow time for optimization. The sell side isn't going to instantly be optimized to this. Steward your campaign better than you ever have before. Timely, right when you start it, ongoing, and then tighten the terms. That's what we recommend. Make sure your vendors follow the reconciliation guidance we've issued. We've been executing projects to cross-tag campaigns with multiple vendors and compare them to each other, and they're different. The results are different from some of these vendors, but we're tightening that, and we're actually about to release the third phase of reconciliation guidance, which we believe will close the issue. And then we issued some implementation guidance last October. If you haven't seen that, you should look at it. It's on the MRC website, and it gives you recommendations for how you should go forward implementing viewability. So try to follow that guidance. This is, I'm not going to belabor it, but I think the MPA can make this presentation available. This is a list of everybody that's accredited for display and video. There's a lot more display than video. What I can tell you is it's a lot harder to accredit video viewability than display. It's difficult. There's a lot of other vendors out there that do this. Some of them are under audit also, not accredited yet. What kind of, well, so all that I just said about viewability is about desktop. And most of you guys know that desktop is becoming a less and less proportion of the activity on your sites. So we're trying to author a mobile viewability standard, and it's difficult. We just had the first meeting of that project team. We think it'll be faster because we already have the desktop standard, and we really kind of already know the approaches that we want to use. But there are some very difficult issues. Overcoming the lack of flash in some mobile situations where you need flash to execute one of the key methods of measuring viewability called browser optimization. In-app viewability is very difficult. The world is basically different there, the JavaScript functions, etc. And measuring how many pixels are on the screen is tough. Everybody pretty much can tell you whether 1 pixel is on the screen. The problem is that doesn't make a viewable impression. Most of you guys know you can't see 1 pixel really, so that's not an ad. We need to know that a sufficient quantity of pixels are on the screen. There's a totally different environment and a dynamic environment in mobile about how people interact with content. You have news feed orientations. If you think about desktop web pages and you go back 10 years, they basically look like they look today. Desktop, there hasn't been a lot of innovation. In truth, what's happening recently in innovation is all driven by mobile. People are converting their desktop sites to emulate mobile looks and feels. And mobile is so dynamic. So all that needs to be taken into consideration. What's a viewable impression? What's cognition of an ad in the context of these news feed or swipe environments? We think it's different, so we have to study that. Sometimes you can't even distinguish browser from in-app environments. If you've ever been in a browser and you're looking at a picture and that loads into something that looks like it takes over the screen, sometimes that's an HTML page. And now the measure has trouble distinguishing, am I still in that app or am I in a browser environment? So that's been a challenge. Invalid traffic concerns in mobile, they still exist. We have to figure out how to analyze and get that under control. So this is, I think, my last slide. What's on the horizon for us? We're about to release a standard on invalid traffic filtration, which is very far-reaching. It's going to raise the bar a lot higher for measurers to remove invalid traffic, digital robots, non-human traffic, fraud, etc. That's going to be starting public comment, we think, within the next 5 working days. We're, as I mentioned, the mobile viewability standards and then the audience-based currency, which is actually already in process. So those are the big 3 priorities for MRC right now. This is my contact information. If you have any questions, this has been super fast, I know, contact me and I'll help you.